So we're going to talk about the history and how it developed over the years, the various minhagim, and I think pretty much everything that everybody here around the table mentioned will feature at some point. One of the articles, perhaps the primary article that I'm referring to over here, is ironically or unironically an article by an individual with the name of Avraham Yari. His name was originally Avraham Wald. Wald means a
field.
What is your German, Steve? What does a Wald mean?
Wald is like it's either
forest.
world or forest.
A forest, yeah. Welt is the world. Wald is a forest, but then when he Hebraicized his name, when he came to Israel, to change it to Yari, which is a forest in Hebrew. So he wrote many very important and interesting articles and books. So I've used a lot from his article and obviously some other things as well. So the first mention of the 15th of Shevat is in the first Mishnah of Masechtas Rosh Hashanah, where the Mishnah says, Arba Rosh Hashanim Heim. There are 4 dates of New Year's. What are the 4 dates, and what does it mean that there are 4 New Years? Says the Mishnah like this: Be'echad b'Nisan, on the first day of Nisan, Rosh Hashanah le'melachim v'le'regalim. It is the Rosh Hashanah as far as kings are concerned and as far as regalim, Jewish holidays, are concerned. What does that mean? Well, what that means is like this. It used to be the practice that the date would be, you would say, today is this and this day, this and this month, in year X to the reign of this and this king, right? For example, you might recall from the Megillas Esther that we read on Purim, all the dates are given as the day of the month in the year X to the reign of Achashverosh, right? So when and throughout in the prophets you have that a lot. So when do you start counting the date for when does the king's year start? It starts on the first day of Nisan. So if a certain king, this is for Jewish kings, we'll see soon about not Jewish kings. For Jewish kings, if the king he sat on the throne on the 29th of Adar, the next day on the first day of Nisan, we're going to say now it's the first of Nisan in the second year to the reign of this king, because the first of Nisan starts the count of the year as far as that is concerned. L'regalim, for Jewish holidays, basically what that means is that if somebody had an obligation to bring a carbon, he would be obligated to do so before, according to one opinion, before 3 holidays of Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot had passed in that sequence. So that's why the first of Nisan is Rosh Hashanah, because it would have to once Rosh Hashanah, once Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot have passed in that sequence, that would be sort of a deadline which he had to avoid overpassing. Okay. Then the Mishnah says, Be'echad ba'elul, on the first day of Elul, is Rosh Hashanah l'maiser behema. It's Rosh Hashanah for maiser behema. What does maiser behema mean? Maiser behema is the mitzvah to give a tenth, 1 out of every 10 animals, as a carbon in the Beis HaMikdash. And the halacha is that you don't mix the animals born in one year with the animals born from another year. So you gather all your animals into the pen and you let them come out one by one, and you count till 10, and then the 10th one you paint with the red dye. Some of you may recall this from Chumash or Rambam, right? And that one becomes the Meiser. And then every year you have to take all your animals that were born within that year and put them in the pen, and you don't mix animals from the previous year or the next year. Each year stands alone. When does the count of the year start? According to this Mishnah, it starts from the first of Elul. Animals born between the first of Elul this year and next year, that's when we count the years. Okay. Then the Mishnah says, Be'echad b'Tishrei, on the first of Tishrei, which that's the day that we all know as Rosh Hashanah, right? That is the Rosh Hashanah for Shanim, Shmitin, Yovelis, Natil, Yerakis, which means that that's the day you start counting the years for the reign of non-Jewish kings. That's the beginning of the year as far as halacha such as Shemitah is concerned, the 7th year, where you're not allowed to plant and plow the fields, and all the things connected to Shemitah. That starts from the first of Tishrei, etc., some other things. And then, the Mishnah says finally the 4th Rosh Hashanah is Be'echad Bishvat, on the 1st of Shvat, is Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan, is Rosh Hashanah for the tree. Kedivri Beis Shammai, according to Beis Shammai, and Beis Hillel, and we always follow whenever there's a machlokes, a dispute between Beis Hillel, the yeshiva of Hillel, and the yeshiva of Shammai. Who do we follow? The yeshiva of Beis Hillel,
Like 6
and he
times.
says, besides 6 times, that's right, and he says, B'chamisha Asar Boy, that Rosh Hashanah Le'ilon is on the 15th of Shvat. So we have Machlokes Beisham and Beisilel. When is Rosh Hashanah for the Elon, for the trees? Is it on the 15th of Shvat or the 1st of Shvat? Now, I want to pose to you a question before I tell you. What do you think Rosh Hashanah Elon means in the context of this Mishnah? We're saying that on the 15th or the 1st, the 15th of Shvat is Rosh Hashanah Elon for the trees. What do you think that means within the context specifically of this Mishnah? Do you have any suggestions or ideas? Is that an answer to this question?
Sort of.
Okay.
It comes out that it's the day of the full moon. So
Yeah,
if-
but
so that's important to know.
okay. But what does it mean? What is the Mishnah telling us? What is significant about this date after you finish reading this Mishnah? Okay. So, if we're gonna, let's say, in the way the Rambam actually coins this phrase is on the 15th of Shvat is Rosh Hashanah L'Maiser She'ilon, for the tithes of the trees, right? What does that mean? The Mishnah is telling you that just like when it comes to the animals, you're not allowed to take the Maiser, the 10th animal, mixing different years. You have to do year by year. When do you count that year from the 1st of Elul to the 1st of Elul? The same is true with fruit of the tree. You don't take Maiser from fruit of the tree that grew this year versus fruit of the tree that grew last year. When do we start counting the year as far as that is concerned? That we don't take a Maiser from this apple and Maiser from that apple. We treat them as separate calculations to take the tithe of the apples. That date is the 15th of Shvat. Let me read to you the way the Rambam says this. We do not take the Truma from the fruit of this year to the fruit of the other year. This is for reference, this is in the Laws of Trumas, chapter Hey, Halacha 11 in the Rambam. And we derive this from the Pasuk Shana Shana, which is actually from Aser to Aser, that's the reading that we read on Yom Tif. And he says, for example, if you harvested an esrog on the 14th of Shvat before the sun set, and then, this is specifically with esrogim, because esrogim are different than other fruit. Other fruit, we follow the date that they blossomed, so it wouldn't be so exact, because you don't know exactly the second that it blossomed. But an esrog is different than other fruits. It's not for now. Why? You learned about this. An esrog is determined by when it was plucked. So if you plucked an esrog on the 14th of Shvat right before sunset, and then you plucked another esrog a few minutes later after the sun has set, so those two esrogim are considered to belong to different years, and the first esrog is tithed with the previous year, and the next esrog is tithed with the following year. Yes?
So I thought I read something this week with regard to Tu Bishvat, that Tu Bishvat is exactly 6 months after the 15th, I think, of Elul, where there's something about the wood in the Beis HaMikdash and
15th
the
of
moisture.
Av.
Oh, it's Av. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Right, and that's supposed to be exactly 6 months, half a year, which would sort of make sense, because if the 15th of Shvat is when the trees are kind of making their upswing toward spring, 6 months later, they're starting their swing toward winter. So there must be some relationship there, right?
Yeah. Okay, so hopefully we'll have a chance to touch upon that later on. What's noticeable right here in the Mishnah right away, a few things. First of all, obviously there's no mention of this being a day of celebration or commemorating or trees or fruit or anything like that. And just like I don't think anybody around this table has ever heard of celebrating the 1st of Elul as being the Rosh Hashanah for animals, this is not a day of celebration. This is just a technical, legal date on the calendar about when you pluck your fruits or when your fruits blossomed, how to deal with your mices. It's technical, it's legal, there's nothing more to it so far, right? In fact, in this Mishnah, there isn't even any mention about Rosh Hashanah, any of the 4 Rosh Hashanahs, being a day of judgment. That comes in a later Mishnah, where it says that there are 4 times in the year where the world is judged. For Rosh Hashanah, on Rosh Hashanah, that's what we call Rosh Hashanah, right? On the 1st of Tishrei, that's when Kol Ba'ei Olam Oivrin Lefanav Kivnei Marain, when all the creatures of the world pass by Hashem for judgment. We paraphrase that in the famous prayer of an Asana Toikef, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That's when everything is judged. And that Mishnah also says that on Pesach, we're judged for the tzvuah, for the produce. On Shavuos, listen up, what are we judged for on Shavuos? For the fruit of the tree. And on Sukkot, we're judged for the water, right? So, if you're talking about the day of judgment, whatever exactly that means, but the day of judgment for the fruit of the tree is not on the 15th of Shvat, it's on Shavuos. Right? So, again, so far, if we're looking at the Mishnah, before we proceed past the Mishnah, we're going sort of in chronological order over here, before we proceed past the Mishnah, in the Mishnah itself, there is no mention of Tu B'Shvat, the 15th of Shvat, being anything other than a technical, legal date that farmers who have fruit growing in their orchards need to be aware of. Yes? Okay. Got it. Now.
So why there's no tachanun?
So why is there no tachanun? That's an excellent question, which I don't really know the answer for. But we're going to touch on that. Okay, so I should just one moment. I just want to a similar line to what you said, Steve. Rashi explains that the reason why Rosh Hashanah Le'ilon is around 15th of Shvat, because that's the time when the rainy season has finished, and the saraf, which is the sap or the resin of the trees, is in full force, which I'm not really a botanicalist, whatever the word is, but I guess somehow that indicates the beginning of the new season, the blossoming, and so that's sort of it's a date it's a date in the solar cycle in the seasons, which is, and it's not just like a random date. We have to still understand why Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel have a 2-week divergence, but it's that time of year when it's the new season. Yes, Bill.
Well, I was just thinking of something else. The grain products that are yashin and not yashin. I mean, just what happens. This is falling out at the end of the growing season. Is there any?
Well, Yashan doesn't apply to fruit. Yashan applies to grains.
Right.
And it's
it just so happens this is the time where you're falling between the old grain and then the new grain. So I was just wondering. If
I don't think that's connected. I don't think that's connected because the date for the Yashan is the first day of Pesach, or the second day of Pesach.
it is. Okay.
For those who keep Yashan now is the time of year where more and more it's like things are ready from the new grain, and then in 3 months, Pesach's in 3 months, guys. In 3 months, as soon as the second day of Pesach dawns, that's it. Everything in the world, that is certainly anything is considered Yashan.
Yeah.
And then anything you buy, all the pastas you're buying in the store throughout the months of April, May, June, July, those months, you have no problem. It's only once you start coming to, I don't know exactly, October, September, somewhere there, where the pastas on the shelf are already from the newer, from the new season. So then those who are makbid and yashan would have to not eat those until the following Pesach. If you makbid both on yashan and you makbid not to sell your chametz, then that pasta is doomed to fade. Yeah.
Okay, so I think there's another scientific connection to this as far as the flow of the sap in the trees, and that it's a known phenomenon that 30 days after the beginning of a season, that's the peak of that season. So, for example, in the winter, right, the solstice is December 20th or 21st. So it's usually 30 days after that you have the worst of the winter, okay? Because, the sun is at its lowest, but it takes 30 days for the earth to adjust. Okay. Same thing in the summer. So summer starts June 20th, 21st. You tend to see the worst of the summer, the hottest, driest, late July and August. So it makes sense, considering the placement of the 15th of Shevat to, late
approximately
January.
a month after.
That's where you've just gone through the climatologically worst part of winter, and now it's just starting to warm up. So.
Fascinating. That's very interesting. Fascinating.
These bags are very doughy.
Yeah, well, we had a poll about those bagels.
Yeah, we already said that.
We're taking but people said it's more doughy, but we didn't get a final consensus on whether that's better or worse.
No, it's not good.
Well, it's relative to price. Everything has a price.
Yeah.
To it. If you're paying nothing for it, I think you would go for that.
Maybe if you can put
Or
it,
paying
you don't have a you have only a flacic oven.
1/3 the price. Maybe
The manual.
something
But that's
we
a
should-
personal
It's
choice.
from
If you're feeding
Aldi.
other people, they might not come for that.
Aldi's, just so you know.
Wow.
All right. Okay.
If you had an oven,
We're gonna have
to warm it
to.
up.
6 in the morning on Sunday. Go get
We're gonna have
bagels
to
for
do some more
everybody.
financial soul searching
I'm gonna
to see
check
if it's
into-
worth
I'm
the
gonna check.
additional $13.22 to anyway. All right.
I'll check into the
That's
bagels
what you
at
pay
Food
for?
for Less.
What? Thank you. What?
I pay like a pack of 12 in Tel Aviv. I pay like $8.
Yeah, that's a lot. That
It's
means
even
it's
more.
$4 for 6.
It's more expensive at
He
Jewel.
paid $2 for 6.
All right. Anyway,
No, I mean,
Now-
what's the base of 13?
who's ever heard of the Cairo Geniza?
Me.
Yes, Cairo.
Cairo
You
Geniza.
said that before.
Yeah, it's very
So
famous.
Cairo Geniza is a very famous Geniza. Geniza, basically, it's a treasure trove of manuscripts, thousands, hundreds of thousands of manuscripts that were basically really discovered around the year 1900, so very recently. And till today, there's still more stuff coming out from there and being deciphered. And the specifically with regards to the 15th of Shevat, there are, put it this way, in our Safrut Chazal, in other words, in our books from the period of Chazal, we have nothing more than what I've already told you about the 15th of Shevat. That's all. You have the Mishnah, that's all we have, right? However, there are some piyutim, poetry, right? We've spoken a lot about poetry and
Oh, that
liturgical
doesn't count.
poetry. Sorry?
That doesn't count.
Well, you'll see in a moment. There are specifically, I believe, 3 piyutim for the 15th of Shvat that were discovered in the Cairo Geniza. So you're talking about discovered in the last just over a century about, which date back to the period of the Go'onim, which is post-Chazal, post-Talmud, to the period of the Go'onim in Israel. However, what seems to be fairly clear from those piyutim is that many of the piyutim from that period are all the piyutim from that period are very strongly anchored on midrashim and statements of Chazal. And what we often see in piyutim is that they must have had midrashim and teachings of Chazal that we no longer have. So we're going to look a little bit at these piyutim from that were discovered in the Geniza. And what's clear from there is that they did, in those days, you're talking in the Go'inic period, in the approximately, I would say, 1000s, they did consider, Tu Bishvat, the 15th of Shvat, was celebrated or commemorated as something specific. It seems like more like of a day of judgment to trees or fruit, even though the Mishnah said the day of judgment of trees and fruit is on Shavuos. And again, we can't say this for certain, but it would seem logical to deduce that they did have access to some sort of tradition or medrash or something which gives that type of significance to 15th of Shvat, even though we no longer have it. You know, we'll talk soon maybe about the name Tu Bishvat, but the word Tu Bishvat, why do we call it Tu Bishvat? Because Tu is Tes and Vav. Tes and Vav is 15.
Yeah.
We don't, the logical numeric for 15th would be Yud and Hey, because, right, Yud Aleph is 11, Yud Beis is 12, but we don't say Yud Hey because Yud Hey spells the name of God, which is actually, we mentioned yesterday, that's the name of God that only appears twice in the Torah, both in yesterday's Parsha, Yud and Hey. So instead of that, we changed to Tes Vav. But that wasn't always the case. Once upon a time, they did refer to the 15th as Yud Hey. And in one of these piyutim, it talks about celebrating or commemorating B'ya Bishvat on the 15th of Shvat. So to us, that sounds foreign because we think of 15 as Tes Vav. But anyway, so I'll just give you a brief look at 2 out of 3 of these piyutim. We'll start with the second one, and I'll show you here a picture. So these piyutim are from the genre of piyutim called kroivis. Kroivis are piyutim comprised of 18 parts corresponding to the 18 blessings of the Amidah, and they were to be said at the conclusion of each blessing of the Amidah. So the second one of these, which is the simpler of the 2, goes like this. It has 18 paragraphs, and they all go in the order of the Aleph Beis. So I'm looking here at the second paragraph. So the second paragraph is for the second bracha of the Amidah, which finishes with the words Baruch Atah Hashem.
No gain ever.
That's the first. What does the second bracha end with?
Chaya Mason.
Mechaya HaMesim. Yeah, resurrects the dead. So it goes like this. There's 4 lines. First of all, they all start with, the first 3 lines all start with a base, because it's going in order of Aleph Beis. Secondly, they all rhyme. So Behilo Neiro Yor LeNechuyim, Berosh Yazil LeFeduyim, Baruch Begish Betchila Eretz Hachayim. So they all the lines rhyme. The third line starts, and all of them starts with the words Berosh Hashanah Le'ilan. Berosh Hashanah Le'ilan, on the Rosh Hashanah of the trees, bless with the rains. The next one is on the Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan, right? The final line of each paragraph starts with a pasuk from somewhere in Tanakh, which starts with the word ki, and connects with the conclusion of that bracha. So, for example, the second bracha is Baruch Atah Hashem Mechayeha Meisim, the resurrection of the dead. So it's about life. So the last line of that paragraph is Ki Moitzi Matzah Chayim Baruch Atah Hashem Mechayeha Meisim. The second one, which is connected to holiness, the third one, connected to holiness, Baruch Atah Hashem. What's the third bracha? What's the third bracha, Bill? You know this. Come on. What's the third bracha of the Amidah? Baruch Atah Hashem.
I have to look at this.
Steve?
Kel Kadosh.
Pray with the
Baruch Atah Hashem Hakel HaKadosh. Yes? The third bracha. The third bracha of the Amidah ends with Blessed are you, God, the whole Hakel HaKadosh, the Holy King. We know this bracha. We talk about it a lot. In the 10 days we say Hamelech HaKadosh, right? So what's going to be a pasuk that starts with the word Ki that connects to that bracha? Ki Gadol B'Kirbech Kadosh Yisrael. Kadosh, holy, right? Okay. So that's this. Now another interesting thing about this bracha about this piyut is that the second line, again, which starts with the order of the aleph base, so it starts with a base, a gimel, is all names of fruit that start with that letter. So, for example, the second one starts with berosh, which I think might be a chestnut. The third one is gimel, starts with geffen, that's a vine, etc. The fifth one is hadas, that's a myrtle. Okay, it's not a fruit, but it's something to do with a tree, etc., etc. All of the letters pretty much start with the name of a fruit or a tree. Okay, so that's one of the piyutim that once upon a time perhaps were recited on the 15th of Shevat. The first one is much more fun, a lot more complicated. It's more fragmented because it comes from this ancient manuscript. Sorry?
Nothing. Side.
Okay, so here, look at this. Look at this one. So the first line, first of all, the introduction to every line spells out Rosh Shana Le'ilan B'Tzedek, every one of them. So Rosh Goliath Dararam, Shana Dararam, Le'ilan Dararam, B'Tzedek Dararam. Right? So that's part of the thing. The first line starts with the order of the aleph base. So aleph base, gimel goes in the order of the whole aleph base. The second line starts off with a taf, and then the second letter of the second line spells out the author's name, which is Yehuda ben something or other Halevi. Not the famous Yehuda Halevi, the Kuzari, a different Yehuda Halevi. Yehuda ben Hillel Halevi. That's the second line. The third line goes in the order of the aleph base backwards. So it starts with a taf, then a shin, then a resh, and backwards. The fourth line goes back to the first letter of the aleph base. The fourth and the fifth line are again in the order of the aleph base, so gimel, dalet, hey, etc. And the final line, the fifth line, besides starting with the letter of the aleph base, is also always a pasuk and always connected with the end of the bracha. So Gadol B'Kirbech Kadosh Yisrael, Baruch Atah Hashem Hakel HaKadosh, Hashivenu Hashem Elecha V'Nashuva, Baruch Atah Hashem Ha'Yitza B'Sashuva. It's always connected to that. In addition, the second line of every paragraph talks about the month. There's a reference here to the 12 months, and we have to get to 18. It also has the holidays. So after it finishes going through the 12 months, it goes through Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, 7 of the holidays. The third line talks about the 12 mazolis of the 12 months. And also talks about, after it's finished through the 12, it goes through, just a second. I don't have it in front of me now, but it goes through other things. And then the next line goes through Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, the 12 Shvatim, Moshe, Aaron, and Pinchas, I think. Yeah, so 17 characters. So that's just to look at some of the poetry that's available. Now you have to understand. So clearly this was commemorated back in the days of in the Middle East and Eretz Yisrael, but this was completely and utterly forgotten from the collective memory of Jews everywhere. Nobody knew about this for thousands of years, for basically 2,000, what am I talking about? For 1,800 years, until it was discovered in, I'm sorry, so this is not, I said before the year, this is much earlier, this is in the beginning of these piyutim come from the very beginning of way before the 9th century. I don't know why I said 9th century. It's much earlier than that, right? The way he writes it here, for 1,800 years it was completely forgotten about until some elements of it were discovered in the Cairo Geniza. And we don't know how much more of it there may have been that were not discovered in the Cairo Geniza, so we don't know, right? And maybe there'll still be more things discovered. The Cairo Geniza there's still new things coming out from the Cairo Geniza. Just recently, an article, a very interesting article, published on different manuscripts of Rambam, which sheds light on certain things. So, anyway, so now we can know that aspect of Tu B'Shvat did exist, but it was forgotten about. And again, now we know about it as a scholarly, as a piece of history, but nobody actually uses these piyutim in their prayer. The practice of that is unheard of.
Why would they stop?
It fizzled out.
Because they're davening.
There's many things that fizzled out like that. Okay. Those type of piyutim. Okay. Now, all right.
Does it have Does it have anything to do with the fact that as each generation gets further away from Sinai, we're losing our hold on Yiddishkeit?
I don't think we're losing our hold on Yiddishkeit. We're going to see soon the resurgence of Tu B'Shvat is very strong, much stronger nowadays than it was even 10, 20, 30 years ago. But we have to get there.
Okay.
Okay. So, Rabbeinu, our next stop in history is about 1,000 years later or so, with Rabbeinu Gershom Meir HaGoyla. Famous Rabbeinu Gershom Meir HaGoyla is most famous for his ban on polygamy, also for some other things. He was asked, is it permissible to institute a fast on Tu B'Shvat? What's the context? The context is that once upon a time, we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago when we spoke about the prayer for rain. Once upon a time, in years of drought, this was more common, there would be series of fasts instituted on the community. Now, what do you do if one of those fasts, which are Monday, Thursday, Monday, so what do you do if one of those Monday, Thursday, Mondays is going to be the 15th of Shvat? Can you fast? And he says, better don't do that. You shouldn't fast on those days. You should push it off to the following week. Why should you not fast on the 15th of Shvat? So, he says two things. Or three things. He says, the Mishnah enumerates 4 days of Rosh Hashanah. Yes? You with me, Rabbi Steve? Mm-hmm. The Mishnah enumerates 4 days of Rosh Hashanah. Now, the other 3 days, besides the 15th of Shvat, you don't make a fast. Why don't you make a fast? Why would you not make a fast on the other Rosh Hashanahs?
They're festivals. You're celebrating.
Who mentioned celebrating?
Well, like Rosh Hashanah.
Oh, Rosh Hashanah. So Rosh Hashanah is a holiday thing. What about the other ones?
Yeah, the other ones I really don't get. I don't really understand why those dates, especially the one for the animal. You said it was Elul, first of Elul.
Yeah.
It's kind of arbitrary.
Well, I'm sure there's a good reason why it's that date, but again, it's not. That's my point. It's not. It's a technical date on the calendar. It's like today you have whatever date it is that you have to file your taxes by. It's just a technical date where it's a legality. It's not a day of celebration. But it so happens that those other ones are on Rosh Chodesh, and on Rosh Chodesh we don't fast, right?
Yeah,
right.
That's
so. Says Rabbeinu Gershom Meir HaGoyla, because the other 3 are on days that we don't make a fast, so, good idea not to fast on this one as well. Now, you might say, that's completely arbitrary. The reason you don't fast on the day of Rosh Hashanah Behema, Ma'aseh Behema, is not because it has anything to do with it, because it so happens coincidentally to fall out on the first of the month. In Rosh Chodesh, you don't fast. Why should that pertain to the 15th of Shvat? Right? Is anybody else bothered by that question? Yeah?
Yeah.
Rabbeinu Gershom seems to be comparing two things that it's completely arbitrary. That happens to be in the same list. Okay, so that's a very, very good question. And Rabbeinu Gershom himself is going to address that question. But for some reason, before he addresses that question, he says something else entirely. He says, you need a hacker. A hacker means you need something to remind you of the date. So, for example, he brings a Gemara in Sukkah that tells us that when Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbos, so there's the song that the Levium sing. Reuven, remember this from your old days back in the Beis HaMikdash?
Yeah,
there's a song that the Levium sing on Shabbos, and there's a song that the Levium sing on Rosh Chodesh. So if Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh coincide, which one should come first? You would say Shabbos, because usually the rule is Tadir v'she'enu Tadir Kaidem, that you do the one that is more frequent first. So Shabbos is more frequent than Rosh Chodesh, so you should sing the song of Shabbos first. But the Gemara says no. We specifically turn that around, we flip that around, and we make the first, and hence I guess the more prominent one, the song of Rosh Chodesh. Why? Because we want people to have a hecker to know that which day was Rosh Chodesh. In those days there's no fixed calendar, and so we want to publicize that today is Rosh Chodesh, so that people should know to keep their calendars in check. So we go out of our way to publicize that by switching around the order of the songs.
So you're saying that people knew what day of the month, Rosh Chodesh, when it was Rosh Chodesh, by the songs that were sung in the Beis.
Well, that was one of the ways. Then the Gemara continues and says, hold on, why do you need to bother with this? There's already another thing that we're doing different on Rosh Chodesh in the Beis HaMikdash, because we put the where we place the animals on the Mizbeach, whatever, it's a thing. The Gemara says, yeah, better to have two hekerim, two reminders, because some people might see one and not the other, right? So the point is that we're trying to do something to remind ourselves that today is Rosh Chodesh, so that people should know. So Rabbeinu Gershom is saying, he seems to be saying, that would be a reason not to fast on the 15th of Shvat, because it's important that people know when the 15th of Shvat is, so that they know not to mix their tithe with their esrogim from the previous year and the next year. So we make sure, don't make a fast, and everybody's going to say, hey, today is supposed to be the next day in the series of fasts. Why are we pushing it off to next week? Oh, because it's the 15th of Shvat. That reminds me, I better make sure to have my books in check. Okay. Then Rabbeinu Gershom goes back to his first comparison, where he says that because the Mishnah enumerates all four together, therefore we should not fast on the 15th of Shvat. And we ask the question, what's the connection? The other days the reason you don't fast is because it's Rosh Chodesh. So Rabbeinu Gershom then brings a proof from a Gemara, which we'll skip the details of that Gemara for now, but the point is, he says, you see that the Gemara elsewhere deduces something from a list in the Mishnah, even though they're not connected. The Mishnah enumerates three things together: Eser, Netiyos, Arava, Nisuch HaMayim, and the Gemara says because the din of Eser of Arava and Nisuch HaMayim only applies in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, so we deduce from there that Eser Netiyos also only applies in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. It's not relevant not right now to know what those three things are. The point is that even though the list is not about when they apply, the list is about something else entirely. But the Gemara deduces from there that because they're enumerated together, we kind of treat them all the same. So by the same token, says Rabbeinu Gershom, I'm going to do the same thing. Even though the Mishnah enumerates these four dates together, it happens to be that 3 out of 4 are dates that you do not make a fast. So therefore, even though it seems to be completely arbitrary, it's legitimate, says Rabbeinu Gershom, for me to say that we shouldn't fast on the 15th of Shvat either. And again, what seems to be his drive to do so? His drive to do so seems to be to create a hacker, to give Tu B'Shvat, the 15th of Shvat, some more prominence, so that people should remember to keep all their books in check. Right? Now, this has some important halachic significance, because fast days are still relevant. When a fast day is relevant today, I think most commonly nowadays, So there's public fasts and private fasts. A public fast is when the community say, look, we're all going to get together and fast and pray on this day. And a private fast is when an individual will say, I have a personal reason to want to fast today. Nowadays, for the most part, these things are not so common. It's not common that a community should fast together, and it's not common that an individual should fast as an individual. The only time when it's very common nowadays is, can anybody guess, when do people have a private fast that they do nowadays?
If somebody dropped,
When they get married.
Very good. If somebody, yeah, that's true too. On the day of a wedding. So if somebody gets married on the 15th of Shevat, is he supposed to fast? This is a really important question. Says the Magen Avraham, no, you shouldn't fast on the 15th of Shevat. Right? Now this is actually a big problem. I'm going to leave you with a little bit of a tzarechiyun over here, because Rabbeinu Gershom's whole idea that you shouldn't fast was talking about a community fast. And his basis for saying that you don't make a community fast on the 15th of Shvat was because the Mishnah enumerates the 15th of Shvat together with 3 other dates. Right? Now, out of those 3 other dates, there is 1 and possibly 2 that an individual may fast. First of all, on the Rosh Chodesh Nisan, so even though generally speaking on Rosh Chodesh you don't fast, Rosh Chodesh Nisan is an exception. Rosh Chodesh Nisan one may fast, and it says, I don't know, I'm not sure offhand what the actual practice is, but in Shulchan Aruch it's certainly brought that if somebody is getting married on the 1st of Nisan, he should fast, on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. The Ramah says that. And secondly, even Rosh Hashanah, what we call Rosh Hashanah, the 1st of Tishrei, there is an opinion that it's a good thing to fast, and that opinion has practical relevance to us. What's the practical relevance? Even though we do eat on Rosh Hashanah, but if a person benched on Rosh Hashanah day and forgot to say Ya'alav Yavi in benching, he does not repeat benching. Why? Because you only repeat benching for a mission of Ya'alav Yavi on a day that you have to eat bread. So, for example, that's why if you omit Ya'alav Yavi in benching on Rosh Chodesh, you don't repeat benching because there's no obligation to eat bread on Rosh Chodesh. If you forget Ya'alav Yavi on Yom Tov, you have to repeat benching because eating bread on Yom Tov is obligatory. What if you forget the Ya'alav Yavi on the day of Rosh Hashanah, not in the night, on the day of Rosh Hashanah? Then you don't repeat benching. Why? Because there is an opinion that that an individual may fast on, and maybe even should fast on Rosh Hashanah. That's why we don't repeat benching. So coming right back, the Magen Avraham says you don't fast even for a chassan who gets married. You shouldn't fast a tainas yachid, an individual fast, a private fast, on the 15th of Shvat. Why? All Rabbeinu Gershom said was that a community don't make a fast on the 15th of Shvat because the 15th of Shvat is in the same list as those other dates. But how could the Magen Avraham take that a step further and say that you don't fast, even an individual shouldn't fast on the 15th of Shvat, when 1 and possibly 2 of those other dates in that same list are explicitly days where an individual may fast? You follow my question?
I think so.
Yeah?
Not totally.
I'll say it one more time. I'm going to say it one more time. Step 1, Rabbeinu Gershom says, don't make a public fast on the 15th of Shvat. Why? Because the 15th of Shvat finds itself in the same list as the 1st of Nisan. Let's just use that date as an example. So the 1st of Nisan is a date that you don't make a public fast. Ergo, you don't make a public fast on the 15th of Shvat. Okay, fair enough. Comes the Magen Avraham and he says, even a private fast you don't make on the 15th of Shvat. Why? The whole basis to forbid fasting on the 15th of Shvat was that it's in the same list of the 1st of Nisan. The 1st of Nisan, it's explicit in Shulchan Aruch that you may do an individual fast and you're only barred from public fasting. So why should there be any problem with an individual fasting on the 15th of Shvat? Very practical question. A guy is getting married on the 15th of Shvat. He comes to the rabbi, am I supposed to fast? The Magen Avraham says no, but there would seem to be no logical basis for the Magen Avraham's ruling. Right? There have been some answers suggested. Personally, I prefer to just leave that as a question mark. That's the Magen Avraham's ruling. It seems to be unclear why he would say so. Now, the second, so in the times of the Goyim, we have these days of celebration and extra liturgical prayers and poems and stuff. Fine, that's all but forgotten about. Many, many years later, in Ashkenaz, Rabbeinu Gershom HaGoyla, he says, no fasting, no public fasting on the 15th of Shvat. Another Ashkenazi minhag that developed on the 15th of Shvat, in some Ashkenazi communities, not all, was not to say Tachlon. Don't say Tachlon on the 15th of Shvat. And again, we have to ask the question, why should there not be any Tachlon on the 15th of Shvat? I think, Avram, you asked that question before earlier, right?
Yeah.
So, and by the way, it's interesting to note that this minhag did not, I think I mentioned, it's brought in so the first mention of this minhag not to say Tachlon is in the Maharil, Rabbi Yaakov Mulin, who is the source of many Ashkenazi minhagim, and he says that in some Ashkenazi communities we don't say Tachlon. However, he finishes off that in two very prominent Ashkenazi communities they did say Tachlon on the 15th of Shvat, and those are Magensa and Vermeiza, otherwise known as Mains and Worms. In Mains and Worms they did say Tachlon on the 15th of Shvat. There's a lot of discussion in the halacha, in the Paskim, whether we should omit Tachlon also on the mincha before the 15th of Shvat. Obviously, you know the Chabad custom is that we do omit Tachlon the afternoon before. There's a lot of discussion as to why and how. Not for now. But there does, even the very custom of omission of Tachlon on the 15th of Shvat doesn't seem to have any very clear reason. There have been some very nice mystical reasons suggested. There's the Shem Shmuel, the Sachet Shava, who says that the reason Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan is on the 15th of Shvat is because that's the end of the rain season, and rain represents the word of God, as we say in the Haftarah of the fast days, that my word Hashem is compared to the rain. So anyway, based on that, he builds a whole beautiful thing about the significance of the 15th of Shvat, and that's the reason not to say Tachlon, and many other similar things have been suggested. I think there's something there may be something from the Rabbi about this, I'm not sure. But be that as it may, many reasons have been suggested. One interesting reason that I like, which is kind of in line with everything what we're saying until now, and I think this is what the Rebbe also says, and that's Fabregan, but this is brought down b'shem the Aderes. The Aderes is Reb something Rabinowitz Ta'omim. He was a twin, so he was called Ta'omim. His last name was Rabinowitz. I forgot what the Aleph Dalet stands for, maybe Avram David. He was a very famous Lithuanian Pesach who eventually moved to Eretz Yisrael. He passed away in Israel in the early 1900s. He was the father-in-law of Rav Kook, wrote many Sefarim. He was perhaps one of the things he's famous for, which we've discussed here in the past, is the attempt to revive some sort of commemoration of the mitzvah of Hakel, which is something that the Rebbe very much promoted. So he says that you okay, Pam? He says that the reason not to say Tachlon is heker. In other words, the same reason that the Rabbi Negoshim said not to fast, because we need a heker that people should remember this date to make sure to take care of their bookkeeping of when they're doing their meiser. Yeah. Okay. So that's why. So we need a heker. So according to that Deres, it's just like this is just a little technicality. We're going to skip Tachlon. Everybody's going to, hey, how come we know Tachlon today? Oh yeah, I better take care of my taxes. I better take care of taking my meiser on my fruit. Okay. So those are the two minhagim in Ashkenaz that developed. And finally, interestingly, and again, I think people might automatically assume that this is a Sephardi minhag, but it's actually not. It's a Ashkenazi minhag. Is to eat fruit. Eat fruit on the 15th of Shvat. And interesting, this is a minhag that's first mentioned in by a Rabbi Socher ben Susan, who was he was himself was a Moroccan Sephardi, but he was reporting Ashkenazi minhagim that he observed. And this is going back to the 16th century, and he talks about observing people having a lot of fruit. It's interesting to note that one of the places where this one of the places where this minhag of celebrating with fruit and stuff was most common was recorded in the minhagim of the city of Worms of Vermeiza, who, if you recall, that was a community who did say Tachlon. But listen to this from the Pinkas, from the journal of Reb Yosef, who's recording some of the minhagim of Vermeiza, of Worms. He says, on Purim and on the 15th of Av and the 15th of Shvat, these are days the mefagri behud rabbanon. It's interesting in contemporary jargon, Yom de Pagra, we refer to any holiday like Yutes Kislev or these sort of Chabad holidays or things like that. We call it as a Yom de Pagra, but the root of the word is Yom. It's from a Gemara in Shabbos. Yom de Mefagra b'hu bar abanan means a day that they would let the kids off of school and they would be able to just be lazy that day. So, lazy days. So the lazy days where we have off school in Worms, the days that they had off school were Purim, the 15th of Av, and the 15th of Shevat. Somehow we got from the 15th of Av to having a whole 10-week vacation from school. Don't ask me about that. Then he says, and Lag Ba'omer. And those days the Beis HaMedrash is closed. There's no children coming to school. But the teacher does have to give the children, in the morning when they leave shul and they're not going to school, they're going home, the teacher gives the children yayin saraf. He gives them that's underage drinking. He gives them schnapps and sweet cake from his own pocket. So this was the teacher's part of their, from his own budget. He would take out money to supply schnapps and cake for the little kids who got the day off school to be lazy. That is the minhag. And elsewhere he writes, Chamisha Bishvat is a day. When he says we do say Tachnun, even in Shachris, but it's a day when we have Mefagri Be'Rabbanon HaMalamdim, they let the kids be lazy and off of school, especially to the younger kids, and it's a day of celebration and joy for the teachers, and they give them wine, they give them schnapps, etc. Okay. So, these are the minhagim that are emerging and being recorded around 10th, 11th century. Some Ashkenazi communities didn't say Tachlun. We see an idea of some Ashkenazi communities avoiding to fast on that day. And then we have the minhag of eating fruit.
Do we know what the minhags were in Eretz Yisrael at that time?
Well, this is... at some point this minhag made its way to Eretz Yisrael, because you have the source I quoted before from one second, here. From Susan, Ben Susan, he's recording from the Ashkenazi community in Sfas in the 16th century, so that's later, but it's not so much later, because the Maharil, what are the dates of the Maharil? The Maharil is also 16th century, I think. So that's all around the same time. Maybe Maharil is a bit earlier, I don't know. Okay, I have to look it up, he might be earlier, but okay. Where does the major switch happen in the 15th of Shevat becoming such a famous, celebrated day all over? So this comes from none other than the Chemdes Hayamim. Okay, what's the Chemdes Hayamim? Chemdes Hayamim is an uber controversial book, which till today scholars can't get enough having their debates about it. It's a very influential book based on Kabbalah. Oh, one second, I should say one more thing before that. You would think perhaps the Arizal, it would be apropos for the Arizal to have some sort of celebration or commemoration of 15th of Shevat. Nada. There's nothing in any of the teachings of the Arizal and his students that mention anything about commemorating or celebrating the 15th of Shevat. No fruit, no nothing. It doesn't exist. Right? Chemdes Yom. So Chemdes Yom, like I said, is a very controversial sefer. A sefer which has had a lot of influence on many of our minhagim. The main reason why it's so controversial is because it's unclear exactly who the author stroke compiler was, but it seems clear that, or al kapanim, there's certain strong allegations that he may have been strongly influenced by Sabbatianism. So that's why, by Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi, Sabbatianism, which was he was the famous false Messiah. Right. So he wasn't just a false Messiah. There was a whole school of Kabbalah that was led by him and his Nasan Hazasi, Nathan from Gaza, who was his foremost student and promoter. That's not the topic for right now to discuss the history of Shabtai Tzvi, or as David Taub from the Parsha Rabbit Hole says, Shabtai Tzviver. But so the Chemdes Yomim is a very controversial sefer. However, but the fact is, in the Chemdes Yomim, we don't even know definitively who wrote this or where he got this from, but he creates a very elaborate minhag, seder, almost like you have a seder on the Pesach night, similar Seder night for the 15th of Shvat, he explicitly acknowledges that even though the Arizal didn't do this, but I still think this is a good idea, and he discusses different fruit to eat. He says there's about 30 types of there's 30 types of fruits that grow in Israel, and he distinguishes between 3 types of fruits. There's 10 types of fruit that you eat the inside and not the outside, like nuts and almonds, and then there's 10 types of fruit that you eat the outside and not the inside, like olives and dates, and there's 10 types of fruit that you eat the inside and the outside, like grapes and apples. And these correspond to the 3 worlds, and there's various psukim to recite connected to trees and fruit and the revival of the dead. And he creates this whole Seder of the 15th of Shvat. Now, the Chemdes Hayomim's Seder for the 15th of Shvat, that grew popularity very quickly. It was printed as a Pri-Eitz Hadar. In other words, those sections of the Chemdes Hayomim were printed as their own little pamphlet called Pri-Eitz Hadar, printed in a number of different places, and all over Italy it became very prominent, and that developed into Mormon Hagim. There's subsequently poems written to recite at the Seder and all different things. The father of the household makes the bracha on the wheat because he's compared to wheat. The woman is compared to the vine, so she makes the bracha on the grape. And from here, and I'm sure some of you have seen or have friends who commemorate and do, I'm sure you've seen somewhere like a Seder for Tu Bishvat, right? And various iterations of this Pri-Eitz Hadar from the Chemdes Hayomim have developed, and that aspect of it now is where we move from Sephardi to Ashkenazi. That aspect of it did become much more popular in Sephardi communities, starting out in Italy, which isn't really Sephardi; that's their own. In Rome, it's its own minhag. But that grew. Spread to Baghdad, famously. The Ben Ish Chai from Baghdad, he talks a lot about it, and to other great Sephardi. And in India also, Ashkenazim initially were not so cool about this. He brings here in this article from a Ashkenazi journalist who was traveling, and he saw this, and he describes in great detail the Seder of Tu B'Shvat that he witnessed in India, and he's like, he's clearly, dismissive of this weird, like, what are they doing? This is strange and whatever. But over the years, this did develop and spread and has become much more widespread recently. A couple of closing remarks. First of all, in Chabad, the 15th of Shvat was unheard of. It was never, my understanding is that in earlier generations of Chabad, 15th of Shvat was, other than the Mishnah of Tachnun, was not a thing, just like it was in the majority of the Ashkenazi world in those days. The Rebbe is the one who kind of revived some sort of commemoration of the 15th of Shvat within Chabad, and even that was only in the later years. I believe that the first time the Rebbe held a Farbrengen on the 15th of Shvat, besides if it was on Shabbos, there was sometimes a Farbrengen. And also don't forget that the 15th of Shvat is very close to the 10th of Shvat, which was a very prominent date in the Rebbe's calendar. So the Farbrengens that were, if the 15th of Shvat fell on Shabbos, already in the early years of the Rebbe's leadership, there would often be a Farbrengen on that date, and it was always associated with sort of the follow-up of the 10th of Shvat of the Frierdiker Rebbe's Yartzeit and Basi Lagani and all of that. In the later years, the Rebbe, I don't know the exact dates, but the Rebbe did certainly hold Farbrengens on the 15th of Shvat a few times, even in the weekday. There's even a famous picture of the Rebbe sitting on a Farbrengen with a big bowl of fruit in front of him, and he ate from those fruit. That was on the 15th Shvat Farbrengen. I think the first time was somewhere in the mid-70s, and then it probably happened another few times afterwards. I didn't check up all the dates. What was the theme that the Rebbe spoke about? So again, very often the Rebbe was talking about the sort of continuing the theme of Yud Shvat. The Rebbe did mention many times the minhag of eating fruit, specifically eating fruit from the Shivas Haminim, from the 7 species. I believe the Rebbe may have mentioned a couple of times also the idea of saying a shehachayanu on a fruit, if possible. Often the Rebbe spoke about different lessons to be learned from trees and from comparing a person, Adam et Asada. We compare the person to a tree, bearing fruit, giving fruit, teaching, studying Torah. The Rebbe many times at the Tu B'Shvat Farbrengens spoke about extra emphasis on Torah study. In one Farbrengen which I see here, the Rebbe, and this kind of sort of touches on what what you said reminded me of it, is the Rebbe says that what's this, we have this Machlokes, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, is it on the 15th of Shvat or the 1st of Shvat? So the Rebbe connects that to the general theme of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, who, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, there's a general theme that the difference between them is whether we focus on the potential or the actual. So Beis Hillel focuses on the actual, Beis Shammai focuses on the potential. So we find that in many machlokes, and that's a sort of a that's a theme in their machlokes. So here also the Rabbi says it has to do with being 3 months after the original. I'm sorry, is it 3 months or 4 months? Yeah, 4 months after the original judgment for the trees. So the judgment of the tree of the water, because it's the end of the rainy season, right? So the judgment of the water is on Sukkot, so it's 4 months later from the 15th of Tishrei to the 15th of Shvat. But Beis Shammai, who emphasizes the potential, so already on Rosh Hashanah, which is on the 1st of Tishrei, so that's day when the general day of judgment for the whole world, so that includes also the water. So on some level and potential, you could say the water was already judged on the 1st of Tishrei, so 4 months later is the 1st of Shvat. That's one idea in explaining that specific machlokes. So that's basically, very, very briefly, the history of commemorating Tu B'Shvat in Chabad, or in this generation of Chabad. And finally, I'll say this. Somebody mentioned before Tu B'Shvat, everybody rolls their eyes. Traditionally, it was called Chamisha Asa B'Shvat. Chamisha Asa means 15th of Shvat. It seems that the phrase Tu B'Shvat, and similarly Tu B'Av, the 15th of Shvat and the 15th of Av, in that sort of making the Tes Vav into a Tu and Tu B'Shvat, became as part of the Zionist resurgence of commemorating these days, not from a religious way but in a secular way. And that's why some people like to avoid using the word Tu B'Shvat. I actually remember the Rebbe I don't think the Rebbe ever said Tu B'Shvat. The Rebbe always said Chamisha Asa B'Shvat. It's interesting, a few years ago there was an article online, like a clickbait title, did the Rebbe actually say Tu B'Shvat? And they found some English letter from the Rebbe where the date on the letter was Tu B'Shvat, T-U-B-I, spelled out Tu B'Shvat. So, I'm trying to make a point. We're proving that it's not absolutely, treif to say the words Tu B'Shvat. Okay. But in contemporary Zionist culture, both Tu B'Av, both Chamisha Asa B'Av and Chamisha Asa B'Shvat have sort of become commemorated into days of celebration as a nationalist, secular holiday, not as a religious, and that's obviously, I think we could all understand, something which the Rebbe was very uncomfortable with. And specifically, there is a letter from the Rebbe to somebody who had written a book about general customs throughout the year cycle, and he had written sent a copy to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe wrote back, first of all, obviously it's not my practice to give haskamas, to give approbation to books, but I'll share with you some thoughts, and my thoughts is that you must absolutely remove from this book practices which are chiloiniyim legamri, which are completely secular, and they don't belong in a book of Jewish practice. They must be removed. And if you don't remove them, then you have no right to tell anybody that you showed me the book, because I don't want anybody thinking just by seeing that I showed me the book and you didn't remove these paragraphs of completely secular customs, that would somehow mean that the Lubavitcher Rebbe gives his approval. And what's one of the books, the minhagim that the Rebbe tells him to remove from the book? He had written something about a minhag of planting trees on the 15th of Shvat, and the Rebbe said, no way, Jose, remove that from the book if you want anyone to know that you even sent me a copy of it, because that's something that became, in contemporary times, that became sort of the Zionist thing. We're going to plant trees on the 15th of Shvat, and the Rebbe wanted a very clear distinction between minhagim, which are holy and have their source in Minhag Yisrael Torah, versus minhagim, which are created out of a vacuum of holiness. So not that there's anything wrong with planting trees per se, and it's actually an interesting, because there's another whole Zalman Shazar, who was the president of Israel in the 20s, I think, in the 60s, in the Tashechavs, and he had a very close personal relationship with the Rebbe. He himself came from, his name was Shnei Zalman, he came from a Chabad background. He had this whole idea in honor of 150 years to the Alter Rebbe to plant a forest in Israel on the Alter Rebbe's name, and how that would bring prominence to Chabad and the Alter Rebbe. And the Rebbe, politely but very firmly, absolutely rejected that idea, and the Rebbe wrote a letter to Shazar about it, and the Rebbe subsequently wrote another letter about that to Rebbe Shlomo Yosef Zevin. But that's not to do with the 15th of Shevat specifically. But it seems that this whole anything that, in general, any minhag that didn't have a source in a holy source, and anything that was coming from a place of a void of holiness, of Zionist sort of us creating a nationhood outside of Torah and mitzvahs, was something that the Rebbe really abhorred, and that's why the Rebbe did not want to have this idea of planting on the 15th of Shvat. Yes.
Yeah, so I find this very curious because I remember as a grade schooler in the 60s attending
Oh yeah, everybody had
Hebrew school at Beth Hillel.
that was the biggest mitzvah you could do, was to plant a tree in Israel, right?
That was a thing, and I suppose it's also so somehow with the modern state of Israel, 1948, turning it from a desert, right, into a fertile agricultural, society.
Actually, about that point specifically, in the Rebbe's letter, he mentions to Zevin that there's no, even if you want to get into that there's some mitzvah involved over here about the mitzvah of Yishuv Haaretz, of the agriculture of the land. So the Rebbe says, first of all, that's nothing to do with Torah or whatever, but the Rebbe says, with some reference, that there's no mitzvah involved in planting trees that don't give fruit. So he was talking then about forest, which is not a fruit-giving tree.
Okay, so, all right, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I remember every year giving money and they plant a tree. I don't know what kind of tree it is. I don't know if it's a fruit tree or not. Good point. But on the other hand, for some 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old kid who doesn't really know much, to have that additional awareness of Eretz Yisrael, that there is a holiday to Bishvat, and providing that you're planting a fruit tree which will eventually provide fruit from Eretz Yisrael, it seemed like not everything is negative in that. It seems like there's a positive component
100%.
to that too.
So my take on this, my reading of the Rebbe's attitude on this, is not that there's something wrong with planting a tree per se, but where is this coming from, and what is the context? And the context is to create a holiday out of this specifically in a secular way and not in a religious way. And that's why the Rebbe was so opposed to it. And like the Rebbe wrote in a lot of these type of letters where the Rebbe writes against New Age customs, New Age minhagim, the Rebbe says it's kind of like the Torah says, don't add because adding leads to taking away. And it's like, right, it just so happens that the people who come up with the ideas of planting on Tu B'Shvat are the guys who are not doing any of the other mitzvahs. So yes, in sort of the abstract, when you have a 8-year-old kid in the Midwest United States thinking about planting a tree in Israel, and that promotes his awareness, in the abstract that's a good idea, perhaps. But when that comes, what's the context? Where is this coming from? Who are the people who are promoting it? What else are those very people promoting? I believe that's really what the Rebbe was disturbed by.
That makes sense.
Yeah.